Going into Silent Hill F this year was a more relaxed experience compared to last year's Silent Hill 2 remake. That's not to say there wasn't apprehension over things like the way the combat looked, the decision to set the story outside of the original North American town, or the fact that it would be the first original Silent Hill story in a decade and a half. It's just that it was nowhere near as tense as last year, where I and every OG Silent Hill 2 fan would brood over every frame and every trailer like a teenager overanalyzing a text that they got from their crush, even when that text just says "What's up, LOL." This time around, there was a generally thicker feeling of optimism, for a number of reasons. The most important reason being the story writer, Ryukishi07. He is most famous for a series of murder mystery stories known as When They Cry, and fans of that series immediately noted that the settings, themes, and tone made him a near-perfect candidate for a Silent Hill story. Aside from that, I, among many others, were excited that the game would focus purely on melee combat, and expected that it might provide that sense of vulnerability that we got in the original games. Plus, there seemed to be just this underlying experimental spirit behind this project, which ideally might help Silent Hill regain its boundary-breaking identity. So, did Silent Hill F end up sticking the landing? And is it safe to say that the series is back? Well, let me put it in a way that longtime Silent Hill fans will understand. Silent Hill F is the new Silent Hill 4. In case you don't know what that means, Silent Hill 4 is generally understood as the most divisive in the franchise. There are people that really don't like that game, but then there are people who will fight to the death for it, like Joel at the end of The Last of Us. Then there are people like me that respect the hell out of Silent Hill 4 and think it's a good game, but don't always enjoy playing it. This is all because Silent Hill 4 took the pre-established formula and experimented with it in a variety of bold ways. Some of the results were so good that future games paid homage to it, like how the PT Silent Hills demo adopted a first-person perspective. Other aspects, like the escort mission and the revisiting of past levels, did not. One's willingness to accept and adapt to these kinds of changes will determine one's overall enjoyment of both Silent Hill 4 and Silent Hill F. In my case, the changes made ultimately made me like Silent Hill F overall. In a number of respects, I really like it, but I don't love it. I absolutely loved the first half of the game, but a number of flaws started to become apparent as I entered the second half. That's not to say I dislike or hate the second half. There's a lot of stuff there that I like too, but it was in the second half that every aspect of the game's design started to reveal limitations, from the combat to the story to the graphics, etc. There weren't enough problems to stop me from liking the game nor recommending people give it a shot. But again, your mileage may vary. Two quick things before I get deep into specifics. First, this video contains no spoilers, and all in-game footage that I use will come exclusively from the first half of the game. Second, remember to hit the subscribe button because I will be doing deep dives into Silent Hill F lore over the next couple of months, and you won't want to miss out. Now, let's get started. First up is visual presentation. An editor for IGN Japan named Ezra Crabb said in their preview for Silent Hill F that the town of Ebisugaoka is one of, if not the most impressive realization of a contemporary Japanese town in a video game. And that was coming from somebody who has lived in Japan most of their life and who loves games like Shenmue and Persona. Though I have never been to Japan, it is immediately obvious just how much love and attention went into making the small town of Ebisugaoka feel as authentic to 1960s Japan as possible. The mixture of old-school Japanese elements like tatami mats, shoji screens, Engawa porches, and thatched roofs, alongside more modern building materials like steel and concrete, are all evocative of that era. But what really makes it feel authentic are the small details, a pair of pants hanging out of a washing machine, the labels on candy, or the offerings left at grave sites. It all feels very organic and lived in, even though, because it's a Silent Hill game, everything looks like it was abandoned long ago. The same is true for this game's version of The Otherworld. Though it abandons a lot of the iconic rust and dirt and replaces it with clean Shinto iconography and architecture, it is nonetheless sinister and unsettling. The most important visual element that I was looking forward to had to do with the underlying design philosophy for Silent Hill F, that being horror through beauty. Through the incorporation of symbols and entities normally associated with beauty, Silent Hill F was able to evolve beyond the drab, grayish, and sepia colors that defined past games and incorporate vivid reds, whites, blues, and greens. The result is both distinct yet familiar. Scary, but occasionally pretty. It's one of the most unique forms of art direction that I've seen in a video game, and if it weren't for Clair Obscur Expedition 33 releasing this year, I think Silent Hill F would be winning a lot of awards. And of course, all the monster designs exhibit this design philosophy wonderfully while containing all the deep symbolism that we have come to expect, even though I would argue it's easier to determine what each monster symbolizes in this game than any game that came before. Now, while the game looks great in terms of art direction and graphical fidelity, does it run well? The answer is generally yes, but there are a couple of big exceptions. From what I understand, the game actually runs surprisingly well on a base PlayStation 5, and much better than Konami's two most recent releases, that being Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater and Silent Hill 2 Remake. Aside from the occasional stutter that we've come to expect from games running on Unreal Engine 5, Silent Hill F maintains an almost consistent 60 frames per second on performance mode. There doesn't appear to be much visual difference in the 30 frames per second quality mode either. The big problem though, as was the case with MGS Delta, is that for some reason the game currently runs worse on the supposedly superior PlayStation 5 Pro. This is primarily because the PlayStation 5 Pro's unique brand of AI-driven upscaling seems to clash with ray tracing effects. The result is artifacting in shadows and noise effects, and not the cool kind of noise effects like we got with the PS2 era Silent Hill games. That said, I played this game primarily on PC, and though for the most part my experience was fine, generally as good as when I played Silent Hill 2 Remake last year, I did suffer one crash to desktop and I still got a decent amount of Unreal Engine 5 stutter. It's not at all game-breaking though. The majority of the time I had to really be paying attention to notice it. However, there were two sections of the game where it got offensively bad for me. This would happen when I was running through the town and there was a lot of enemies and weather effects happening around me. It was only in this specific area though for some reason, whereas in later parts of the game where there appeared to be even more monsters and effects, I didn't have that problem whatsoever. Hopefully whatever this is can be addressed with performance patches in the future. Overall, it's an excellent visual presentation with generally good performance, that does have some room for improvement. Moving on to sound design and music. There's no safer bet that you can make than betting that a Silent Hill game will have great audio, except maybe betting that Electronic Arts will find some way to monetize your controller batteries. Silent Hill F is no exception. It's a great mixture of all the instruments and industrial sound effects that we have come to expect, with a heavy injection of Asian sonic flavor. One moment you'll be hearing the plucking of acoustic guitar, piano, and mandolin, and the next moment it's Japanese bamboo flutes, Chinese erhu, and my personal favorite, Mongolian throat singing. But interestingly, where I almost never have any criticism on this front with any Silent Hill game, this is the one time I have to make an exception. In most Silent Hill games, there are dozens of tracks that work both as ambiance, but also as great songs in their own right. In Silent Hill F, there was maybe 3 or 4 songs that met those criteria throughout my entire playthrough. I loved the opening track, the tracks with the throat singing, and 1 or 2 tracks near the end. Everything else, though, just sort of faded into the background and never really stood out. Don't get me wrong, the compositions are all excellent. It's just that most of them lacked those catchy, breezy melodies that we've come to expect from the series. I will quickly say, though, that there are a couple of moments in these songs where it seems like Akira Yamaoka uses a leitmotif from an older Silent Hill game, say from Silent Hill 1's main theme, and when you hear it, the feeling is sublime. Now that was the easy stuff. Let's move on to what is arguably the most controversial element of Silent Hill F, the combat. So, going into Silent Hill F, there were legitimate reasons to be optimistic and pessimistic about combat. On the pessimistic side, there appeared to be a lack of impact with melee attacks, the inclusion of a stamina bar was questionable, and the protagonist's Dragon Ball Z style dodge was off-putting, and not in the cool Silent Hill way. Though I shared some of that pessimism, I was generally optimistic, because it looked like the combat was trying to bring the franchise back to that claustrophobic jankiness which made you feel so vulnerable and terrified in the original Silent Hill games. Stuff like the lack of firearms, the inclusion of weapon durability, and what appeared to be an emphasis on avoiding enemies rather than attacking them sounded very encouraging. So what was the result? Honestly, it's really mixed. For the first half of the game, I think I'm more positive on the combat system than most people. But for the second half, I think I share the majority of people's criticisms. The reason why I say the combat is great in the first half is because it is designed primarily for encounters with 3 enemies or less that are lower level, for lack of a better term. Unless you're facing off against just one of these mannequin enemies or doll enemies, the likelihood that you're going to take a lot of damage is high. I loved this because, again, it encourages you to try and juke the enemies and conserve your resources. If you can't get around them, you have to very carefully time your light and heavy attacks and consider your position relative to the enemy to make sure the attack lands. Then you have to make sure you have enough stamina to either land another attack or back away without getting hit. This is exactly what made the combat in the older games work, albeit updated. It's clunky, but it made everything scarier for me. Best of all, you're normally encountering these enemies in tight spaces, and even when you try to juke them, it's not guaranteed you will succeed. I mean, sure, you can use the lightning fast dodges to juke them, but those cost a lot of stamina. I can't tell you how many times I would juke one enemy, then go around a corner and be unable to juke another one and then lose half of my health. This also kept me cycling through health items, which is a far cry to my experience with Silent Hill 2 Remake's combat. Though I prefer the remake's combat system overall, I can't deny that I never died once and was swimming in health items before the end of that game, so having that sense of vulnerability brought back was bliss to me. But then I got to the second half of the game. Now, as I said at the beginning of this video, I'm not showing any gameplay footage from the second half, but this means I will have to dance around what the problems are a little bit. So, while a good amount of what made the combat great in the first half of the game for me is maintained in the second half, there is unfortunately a number of times where you will have to take on a variety of enemies at once. The combat system is simply not constructed to work in these scenarios. I myself played the whole game on hard difficulty, which, by the way, just as a quick tangent, this game has the worst names for their difficulty settings. It's Story, Hard, and Lost in the Fog. Honestly, the story combat difficulty in this game is probably slightly harder than Silent Hill 2 Remake's normal difficulty, but most first-timers won't pick it because they'll assume it's too easy, so they choose hard thinking that it means it will actually be normal difficulty. Thing is, I probably died more times playing Silent Hill F on hard than I have playing all the other Silent Hill games combined. I am dead serious. But back to the point. When you're facing off against a horde of enemies in a more action-oriented scenario, not only is that mostly foreign to all the other Silent Hill games, the combat system isn't designed in a way to make that fun. It's designed to discourage you from facing the enemies unless you absolutely have to. So when you're going up against some enemies that take what seem like 20 to 30 hits to bring one of them down, and there are a bunch of weaker but still somewhat tanky enemies around them, and you have to do that multiple times in a row, the game quickly becomes tonally and mechanically inconsistent. It's not that these encounters are hard, though they will be for some people. It's that they felt really tedious. It makes the game feel like it's grinding to a halt, and that becomes an even bigger problem if you play the game on Lost in the Fog difficulty. Good luck with that. There are other moments where the game veers more into the action side of things, but again, I can't discuss that further without spoilers. But this is just my opinion on the matter. Based on what I can gather online, there is a sizable number of people that really can't stand how restrictive the combat can feel. If I were to summarize the general sentiment towards combat, I would use the same word used by Oscar Taylor Kent over at Games Radar. It feels over-engineered. They tried to marry the old-school clunkiness with modern game design staples like stamina and dodging, when they could have settled for something simpler like what Silent Hill 2 Remake did. While I appreciate the experimental spirit, and it works the majority of the time for me, it's clear that this is not the case for a sizable chunk of players, and understandably so. But is the general gameplay good, and is it scary? Are the puzzles, exploration, the bosses, are they on par? For the most part, yes. You still find yourself doing the usual Silent Hill shtick where you're indoors, checking which doors are locked or unlocked, finding key items and resources, solving puzzles, and typically fighting some sort of boss at the end. With the exception of 2 areas in the second half, the classic gameplay loop is as good as it has ever been. The puzzles are really neat too. Aside from 2 puzzles that I personally had trouble with, the puzzles on hard difficulty all felt genuinely fair and gave me a great sense of satisfaction when I completed them. Above all, the best moment in this game for me, and this isn't a spoiler because this was in the previews for the game, was when I was doing the Scarecrow puzzle. I won't say what happens, but the end of this puzzle was probably one of the most tense moments I've ever experienced in any horror video game. When I was streaming this part of the game live, I literally had to pause the game because my heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest. Seriously, one of the best moments I've ever experienced in a Silent Hill game. Stuff like inventory management is also handled pretty well. It invokes that classic Resident Evil tension where you have to ask yourself whether it would be better to get rid of one item in favor of something else. Though I will say that the upgrade mechanics and how that factors into inventory management felt kind of pointless, at least for me. You can sacrifice your items at altars in order to get a currency known as Faith, which you can spend on these upgrades called Omamori. These are charms that will do things like boost your health, reduce the amount of damage you take while dodging, or increase weapon durability. Aside from maybe the weapon durability though, it didn't really feel like the charms did much to help. I was still quickly running out of stamina and health on my first playthrough, and to a certain extent on New Game Plus. But that's just me, your experience will likely end up feeling a bit different. Finally, this might be an unpopular opinion, but I actually like the boss fights. I like their designs a lot, and I enjoyed figuring out their attack patterns so much that I went out of my way to get the achievements for fighting them without taking any damage. I do have a couple of pieces of criticism though. First, if you're playing the game with Japanese audio, following what the characters are saying during these boss fights can be a big pain. And also, I felt that a couple of the fights were a bit too flashy and bombastic for a Silent Hill game. But overall, I think Silent Hill F's classic exploration and puzzle solving are still very good, and the experimental additions to the gameplay and combat generally worked for me. But even I have to admit that it started to buckle under its own ambition as the game went on. Other people are going to be less generous to its failings, and I totally understand why. Nonetheless, I respect the creative risks taken here. Now for the big one: story. I cannot begin to explain how excited I was to see what Ryukishi would do with this game's story. I started reading his Higurashi When They Cry series earlier this year, and it instantly became one of my favorite pieces of horror media ever. The man knows how to build an enormous Jenga tower of thick suspense and then demolish it in the most devastating ways. Though also, anybody who has read his work knows that he has an acquired taste. It literally takes 4 or 5 hours before Higurashi's story starts to do anything remotely scary. With that in mind, I was curious how his writing would fare when going from a visual novel that is about 120 hours long to a game that is, at most, a tenth of that size. While Silent Hill F's story didn't end up being the transcendent work of horror that I had been set up to expect, I still think it's a solid, distinctive take, one that delivers more than it falters. But again, Ryukishi's style is not going to be for everybody, and as a burgeoning mega fan of his, even I found some of the things he does to be very questionable. But let's focus on the good first, starting with the game's central premise. The story centers on the main character Shimizu Hanako and her friends as they try to contend with the expectations placed upon them by their parents and society broadly speaking. For the female characters, and especially Hanako, they know that they are basically born to be married in the patriarchal society that was 1960s Japan. What this effectively means is that their sense of individuality, their hopes and aspirations will be erased in favor of serving their husbands. The rest of the game is an exploration of this, amongst many other internal conflicts that, of course, take on physical form in traditional Silent Hill fashion. On a purely thematic level, I think Silent Hill F succeeds. Speaking personally as a neurodivergent person, I commend Ryukishi for his portrayal of the agony that comes with feverishly trying to live up to expectations and yet failing nonetheless. More importantly, he doesn't take the easy road and make out those who are placing these expectations on the main characters to be one-dimensional villains. Just like in real life, those who are pressuring others to conform or fulfill their societal responsibilities also felt that pressure at some point in their own lives. And Silent Hill F explores this in a way that is frighteningly real and relatable. It is here that Ryukishi is able to craft his trademark sense of tension. The friction between individuality and conformity, and the inability for either to reconcile, quickly builds to a boiling point which you simmer in for hours on end. Here's the problem though. Typically, in horror media, there are various times where the tension will crescendo and then climax. In Ryukishi's work, it tends to be one long build-up of tension throughout, with a small handful of giant climaxes, typically towards the end. Silent Hill F is kind of like a compressed version of that, and while I like it, I have seen a lot of people online complaining that there aren't enough of those climactic moments where you feel the need to turn the game off, take the CD out, and pour holy water on it because you're so scared. Though there are 2 or 3 moments that I found really tense and disturbing, there weren't as many scare you shitless moments as one might expect, like when you walk in on Pyramid Head with the mannequins, or when Heather walks into that room with the mirror. That's going to be a problem for some people, but for myself, it worked. Now, if you have watched any other spoiler-free review of Silent Hill F, you will hear each of them say that the story does not end when you first roll credits. There are additional story details and lore that are revealed in New Game Plus, and I'm not just referring to the multiple endings. Anybody who knows anything about Ryukishi knows that this is not only typical of his work, but is typical of a lot of Japanese popular media and especially visual novels. Unfortunately, my feelings regarding the way this is implemented in Silent Hill F are mixed. On the subject of climaxes, the first time I played through the game, the last hour kind of ended on a muted note for me. It was fine, but it left me wanting a lot more. But then I found out that the game might be trying to do this Nier Automata thing where the game adds greater context to past events and even goes in new directions. In terms of lore and world building, this approach works with flying colors, but in terms of narrative and game structure, it's like 50-50. To elaborate more on the latter, where this approach to narrative succeeded is making past events and characters less one-dimensional and more fleshed out. Your assumptions of things that happened are flipped on their head and you're left disoriented and maybe a little ashamed. That's where the new narrative elements excel. The problem is that if you don't like the combat, and if Ryukishi's style of horror isn't for you, then the prospect of going through the rest of the game again to get the rest of the story is going to be a big ask for a lot of people. It's an even bigger ask when the ending that you're locked into on the first go-around doesn't hit as well as it should. Even if people decide to play the game a second time, the stuff that fleshes the other characters out is mostly relegated to text documents and the different endings. There are some changes to the gameplay, the cutscenes, and the levels, but it's often so minimal that I don't think that it will radically change people's minds if they didn't like their experience during the first playthrough. And of course, not everybody is going to like having the extra character development relegated to supplemental text when it arguably should have been presented in cutscenes and dialogue, at least a significant portion of it. Putting that aside though, I can confidently say that the lore and world building are excellent. The amount of references to both mainstream and obscure Asian religions, and the way they are utilized to craft the world and story of Silent Hill F are delightful. It's probably the best that the Silent Hill franchise has done since the end of the Team Silent era. I'm going to have a great time putting together videos talking about all the Asian occult references in this game. For me, Silent Hill F is a bit of a contradiction. It's a game that succeeds and stumbles on account of its ambition. As for where it succeeds and stumbles, that's something that Silent Hill fans are going to debate for years. And honestly, that's a great thing. The debate is part of what keeps this series alive. It challenges players to see horror in unique and interesting ways. And for me, Silent Hill F captures that spirit well, even if it doesn't always nail the execution. And those are my honest thoughts on Silent Hill F. Thank you very much for watching. Please leave your thoughts on the game in the comment section below. I very much want to hear from a variety of people, just please, be civil to one another. Remember to subscribe for my future analysis of the game's lore, and until those videos come out, remember as always and as per usual, stay yellow.